An historic setting for what could be an historic deal. The name of the hotel overlooking Belfast's Loch Culloden, reminiscent of an ancient battle won by the British. But this time round, it's a compromise the Prime Minister is looking for, both with politicians in Northern Ireland and in Europe. And on the face of it, the mood is upbeat.
Clearly, this is a big moment.
It seems to us that it's very much game on.
Optimism, but tinged with the reality that there is still considerable work to do.
So what is the deal? At the moment, the Northern Ireland Protocol means goods coming from Great Britain are checked on arrival at ports like Larne to make sure they comply with EU rules. That arrangement is deeply problematic for unionists. They say the creation of what in effect is a border in the Irish Sea undermines Northern Ireland's place in the UK. And so the largest unionist party, the DUP, has refused to form a power-sharing government at Stormont. So the government has proposed a two-lane system for goods imported from Great Britain. The green lane would be for goods from designated trusted traders just going to Northern Ireland and would have no checks. The red lane would be for goods going into the Irish Republic and would undergo full checks and customs controls. Unionists also want a reduction in the powers of the European Court of Justice, which currently oversees single market issues. But for the deal to ultimately work, the DUP leader says the EU needs to give more ground.
I want to hear that Brussels will stretch itself to recognise the concerns that we have as unionists, and that this process will correct the wrongs of the last negotiations. I do not believe that anyone should be led by a calendar. What is fundamentally and most important here is getting it right.
But as far as Sinn Féin is concerned, the priority is to get Stormont back up and running.
The DUP talk about their tests, but you know, there's one bigger test for everyone, and that's the test of what people expect. There will be a test for everyone. The test will be, are you prepared to govern? Are you prepared to share power on the basis of equality? And everybody concerned is going to face that test, we believe, fairly soon.
John Shannon, who runs a garden centre in Larne, has been watching today's events closely. He's no fan of the Northern Ireland Protocol and the mountain of paperwork he has to fill in for the plants he imports from England.
Well, if the government and the EU are thinking of bringing in green and red lanes, I think it's a great step forward, and hopefully it will come to being when it's announced next week. Certainly our local politicians are very positive, and our local politicians are not famed for being positive.
But the Prime Minister was being positive about the prospects of a deal today. He was keeping a low profile as he left the talks this afternoon. Back at Downing Street, though, he admitted there was still work to do.
There's work to do. We have not got a deal yet. That's why both the Foreign Secretary and I, but also the Secretary of State for Northern Ireland, will continue talking to the European Union to try and find solutions to protect Northern Ireland's place in our internal market and the Belfast Good Friday Agreement, resolve the practical issues and address the democratic deficit.
That was echoed by the Foreign Secretary, who met the Vice President of the European Commission in Brussels today. James Cleverly said there was still work to do to get a deal. But Maros Sefcovic is said to have told ambassadors later agreement was close. The Prime Minister will meet the EC's President, Ursula von der Leyen, tomorrow in Munich, described as an important moment. Agreement on a deal could come as soon as Tuesday. So after a year of wrangling over trade arrangements across the Irish Sea, hopes are high there'll finally be a breakthrough.
Indeed. Well, joining me now is the leader of the Alliance Party in Northern Ireland, Naomi Long. Naomi, thanks very much for coming back on the programme. You were in the room when the Prime Minister briefed you all about the details of this arrangement, of this secret sauce. Can you just tell us what they are?
Well, look, the Prime Minister didn't go into that level of detail with us today. He actually was talking in broader terms about what they were trying to achieve. And I think what we all want to do is to see a deal done as quickly as possible, but one that will last and that will be sustained, because it's fairly clear we can't take a second and third and fourth run at this. It creates instability for markets. It creates instability politically, and it doesn't do any of our businesses any good not to have that stability in place.
But all the briefing and all the reporting that we've just seen, including from Jane Dodge, seems to head in that direction of green lanes for some goods and red lanes for other goods. Is that, broadly speaking, right?
Well, that's the conversation that's been had for many, many months. But the difficulty has been, of course, how that would actually play out in practical terms. So one of the things we stress to the Prime Minister is the important job of road testing any proposals he has with the business community here to make sure that there aren't outstanding issues that haven't been addressed. For us, maintaining our single market access as well as the access into the UK market is absolutely essential. And we are fairly relaxed and pragmatic about how we go about doing that. So red lanes, green lanes, colour them how you wish. If it makes life easier for businesses and it allows us to maintain that key dual market access, then we're open to those solutions.
Because on one level, there seems to be a fairly practical, even rather sort of mundane solution to this. But the political and historical stakes really couldn't be higher, could they?
Well, I think that that's been part of the mistake of how Brexit has been approached in terms of Northern Ireland. Initially, our concerns were ignored when we raised the issues that could be constitutionally difficult, politically difficult here. And then when they were resolved, they were done in a way that I could only describe as dishonest to the politicians here and to the public. So I think we're now dealing with a different government with more maturity that hopefully recognises the importance of getting this right, but also the importance of getting a stable arrangement with the EU that will allow us all to move on and to do other things that are more important, frankly, to those that we represent, because people here are struggling for many reasons, the protocol being the least of them.
And we tried to approach members of the European Research Group and the Tory party and the DUP. They didn't want to come on the programme. But where do you think the bigger obstacle lies? Is it the DUP or members of the ruling party in Westminster?
I think the biggest obstacle lies not just with the DUP, but actually with smaller parties like the TUV and independent voices here who will be opposed to any deal. And the question really that faces Jeffrey Donaldson isn't whether the deal is good or not in the view of the DUP, but whether he can sell it to that wider unionism beyond that. The question and the challenge for the Prime Minister, however, isn't to placate the DUP and their demands. It is to recognise that the DUP are a minority in Northern Ireland. They represent around 30%, under 30% of the population, and that there are many other voices in this community that also require to be brought on board with any deal that comes forward. So it's not an easy job for him to do, but it's important that he doesn't simply placate unionists in this process.
And finally, the European Union years ago said, this is absolutely sacrosanct. We're not budging an inch on this. And they've budged quite a lot since then. The Taoiseach, Leo Varadkar, had said, actually, we made mistakes in the past. Do you think the EU has given enough ground on this one to make a solution stick?
Well, we will know that better when we see the final deal, but certainly my experience of talking to the EU about this, pointing out where the protocol was flawed and could be improved, was that they were open to renegotiation, but only if they felt they were dealing with a good faith actor on the other side of the table. And unfortunately, they did not feel that was the case when Boris Johnson was Prime Minister, and they didn't have time to test Liz Truss. So I think we're now in a different space. I think they've been open to this discussion where they believe that it's somebody who, when they sign a deal, will stick to the deal. And for us in Northern Ireland, that's critical, because this has been disruptive, not just in terms of trade, not just in terms of business, but this has been disruptive to our political situation. And we need that to be drawn to a close.
Absolutely. Naomi Long, thank you very much indeed.